I'll just give folks a few minutes. I guess while we're giving folks a couple more minutes, did you guys do anything special for Earth Day? Do you have any like action that you felt really good about?
Yeah, Elizabeth, who works at HAWC with me, we went out with our board chair, Sarah Carpenter, and Dr. Kate Jennings from CU, and tabled at CU Medical School for HAWC. It was pretty fun.
Nice.
Rosie, what about you? I know that you were running all over the place on Earth Day, Earth Week, Earth Month. Every day's Earth
Yeah,
Day, but I know you did
it
a lot.
felt it was a real Earth season. I know, I'm so lucky to have everybody wants to do Earth stuff. That's so cool, but it was a long month. But I think on actual Earth Day, no, I can't even remember. I think I was at DU, did a really cool like student session with Compost Colorado. That was cool. We did some cool cleanups. Yeah, so many questions about health impacts, really, like as people were seeing, like PFAS headlines and like, we have a plastic spoon in our brain. And like, I think I'm really looking forward to this conversation and hearing from you guys. All right, just give folks maybe one more minute. I'm hardly ever right on time. Did you do anything, Ryan? Just, I mean, you have so much cool nature just around your home.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything like on Earth Day. I mean, the city of Fort Collins with the Sustainable Living Association, they throw a killer Earth Day event up in Fort Collins. So a lot of friendly faces there. The night before, I mean, it was like snowing and 30 degrees, which is like classic for that weekend, but
Yeah.
it cleared up on Earth Day, and it was good to spend a few hours talking with friends and learning about all the cool projects they have going on. I saw friends from Climate Reality and Foco Trash Mob, and they had birds there, golden eagles. I could go on and on. It was a really good event.
Yeah, we were at there was a Lafayette one that was great. And there was like, I was talking to some kids at my booth and they go like 3 seconds until the birds of prey, like, I don't, not exhibit, but like demonstration. And I was like, yeah, you guys have to go. I can't compete with, they had eagles. It was so cool. Okay, 6:03. We are at 50 participants. Pretty good. And yeah, it's a good group. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm sure people will jump on, but we'll go ahead and get started just to honor everybody's time. So hello, everyone. For those of you who are already on, thank you so much for joining us on a gorgeous Thursday evening. Welcome to our webinar all about landfill emission impacts on human and environmental health. My name is Rosie Briggs. I'm the Public Education and Engagement Manager at EcoCycle, and I will just be acting as your NC tonight. This is a webinar style Zoom presentation, so you will notice that your cameras and mics are off. So to ask questions, please do so in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a little question mark in a little speech bubble. We will get a chance to go through questions at the end of our presentation, but you can just put them in there as they come up as the presentation goes on. We are recording this session, and we will send out the recording to you all along with a comprehensive follow-up email. If you have been to one of my webinars, you know I will send you everything that's mentioned in a follow-up email. So all of the resources, all of the next steps, all of the links that we're going to be talking about tonight. So tonight you can just kind of sit back and absorb the information because I know it's going to be a really rich conversation with these panelists. So on that note, I'm just going to start by introducing these amazing panelists. Dr. Nikita Habermel is a mother and pediatric emergency medicine physician who lives in Larimer County, home to one of the largest landfills in the state. In addition to providing the best pediatric emergency care possible, she is passionate about how the climate impacts human health, especially children. Dr. Habermel advocates for her patients and communities as a board member and advocate with Healthy Air and Water Colorado testifying at the Capitol for certain bills and participating in national meetings to support healthier communities. She not only advocates for her patients, but also teaches future physicians in medical school and pediatric residents about how climate change can impact their patients' health. And Ryan Call is the campaigns coordinator for EcoCycle, where he works on zero waste research and policy. Ryan earned his Master of Science in Environmental Policy and Management from the University of Denver and currently lives just outside Fort Collins. Ryan has worked for EcoCycle for over 4 years and has made it his life's mission to reduce the environmental impacts of waste. And joining us also is Alex Boyan, Healthy Air and Water Colorado's Executive Director, who will speak a little bit about HAWC before Dr. Habermel jumps in as a panelist. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to hear from all of you. Before we jump in, let's just take a quick look at our agenda and what this panel will be discussing tonight. We'll start with why our organizations are involved so you can understand kind of the perspective and context a bit better. Then we'll dive into landfill emissions and public health, landfill emissions and the climate. And then we'll get a chance to talk specifically about Colorado Air Quality Control Commission's rulemaking, what is and isn't in the rule, initial economic impact analysis, and what comes after all of this. So before I pass it off to these folks and stop talking, I will just kick off introducing the organizations by introducing EcoCycle. EcoCycle is one of the oldest mission-based recyclers and zero waste organizations in the US and an innovator in resource conservation. We are a nonprofit founded in Boulder in 1976 by a grassroots movement led by community members just like you and me, who created the very first curbside recycling programs in Colorado and one of the very first in the nation. EcoCycle's mission is to innovate, implement, and advocate for local and global zero waste solutions to foster a more regenerative, equitable, and climate resilient future. So why does EcoCycle care about this issue, landfill methane emissions? EcoCycle is involved in Colorado's landfill regulation update because we are deeply committed to lowering the environmental impact of waste, whatever that looks like. And as many of you already know, we advocate for advancing organics diversion and composting systems. So we believe that the best way to manage landfill emissions is to avoid burying these food scraps, these yard trimmings, these other organic materials in the first place and get them composted instead. As you will hear tonight, the issue of landfill pollution touches on many different interconnected issues that we care about, including air quality, public health, environmental justice, and waste management. Later, Ryan will discuss some of the allies who will bring their areas of expertise to address this issue. So next, I will pass the mic to Healthy Air and Water Colorado's Executive Director, Alex Boyan, to speak a little bit about HAWC.
Thanks so much, Rosie, and it's great to be with you all tonight. I'm really thrilled to be part of this webinar and this important work. But to give a little bit of background about Healthy Air and Water Colorado, known as HAWC, for those of you that don't know, we advocate for public policy that focuses exclusively on the growing public health threats posed by climate change. And in particular, we focus on 3 pillars: community health, health justice, and awareness, raising awareness about these health impacts. We elevate the voices of health professionals, so we work with doctors, nurses, researchers, medical students of all kinds, and community activists as well. And we work on issues that address those growing impacts of climate change, including extreme temperatures, air toxics, and threats to water availability and quality, building decarbonization, and the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. HAWC and its advocates engage at the local, regional, state, and federal legislative and regulatory levels on rulemakings and legislation. And in December of 2024, Healthy Air and Water Colorado and Industrious Labs produced a report called Mountainous Methane. There were a couple things that were found there. We know that impacts of climate change disproportionately impact lower income, underserved, and communities of color. And in there's a statistic about of the 3.2 million people who live within a mile of municipal solid waste landfills in the US, 46% are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. It's a pretty striking statistic. And then there was a quote in there that I really liked and pulled out. Reducing methane emissions is the strongest lever we have to slow global warming in the near term, while improving local air quality and public health. So that's why Healthy Air and Water Colorado is involved in the landfill methane issue and in the rulemaking that's going to get underway here with the that Ryan will cover with the Colorado Department of Public Health. So thanks everybody. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm now up next. Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. Before we get into details, I just want to be really high level on this issue. And one starting point is, where do methane emissions come from in landfills? And in short, it's when food scraps, yard trimmings, and other organic materials, not USDA organic, but previously live materials like paper, wood products, when they're buried in landfills, they decompose anaerobically or without oxygen. That creates a chemical reaction that turns into methane gas. And it's, as you'll hear later, it's not just methane that leaks out of landfills. There are also a lot of other toxic chemicals that right along with it. And just to underscore what goes in landfills and what causes this issue, EPA came out with this report, I think just last year, where they tried to identify what is causing these emissions specifically. And they found that even though just 24% of the material that goes into a landfill is food scraps, about 58% of the emissions that come out of landfills are generated because of food scraps. So again, EcoCycle is involved in this issue. We'd really like to solve these issues upstream. And according to Project Drawdown, reducing food waste, not just composting it, which is great, but reducing food waste upstream is one of the top climate solutions. So we just really wanted to underscore the climate impact of keeping food waste and other organic materials out of the landfill in the first place. Also, methane is a super pollutant when it comes to global warming. It is 80 times more potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere compared to carbon dioxide when looked at methane global warming potential over a 20-year period. So you might see that methane is 20 or 24 times as powerful. And that's when you look at the global warming potential over a 100-year period. As folks who care about climate change, we're really focused in the near term. And being a super pollutant, that is one of the reasons why we're focusing on this gas in particular. You'll see in the graph from EPA that landfills are the third largest producer of methane after the oil and gas industry and agriculture. So there's a lot of improvement to be done on this front. And as you'll hear later in more detail, reducing landfill emissions is also a environmental justice issue. Oops, duplicate of that slide. Here's just a graphic from our good friends at RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute, on where landfills leak gas. And there are a lot of different areas, right? It's when the trash is tipped into the landfill. It leaks out of gas collection systems. It leaks out of just any sort of leak in the cover on landfills. Gas comes out of inefficient flaring, which we'll talk a little about later as well. So there are a lot of different avenues. While you might see that this is a problem, we see this as a lot of different opportunities to reduce these emissions. And a quick word on what Colorado is doing on this issue. The state is, sorry, one second. You'll see that landfills are a significant contributor to climate change in Colorado, and reported 3.5 million metric tons of emissions. And I forgot to put which year specifically that was from, but a recent year, which is equal to about 1 million passenger vehicles being driven for a year. So again, a lot of improvement on this front. It's also an issue that's addressed in Colorado's Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap 2.0, which was put together by the Colorado Energy Office. And I always have to say, my dear friend Jay Meyer made this graphic. I love this graphic. Say that to anyone when I have an audience, but it is a near-term strategy that was identified in this report, and that is why the state is taking action on it right now. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Habermill to speak a bit about the human impacts of this issue.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. And I appreciate you explaining a little bit more about the relationship of landfills and methane. And we'll talk even more about that in a bit. I wanted to give a special thanks to our community members for spending time with us this evening, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you. So first, I want to discuss a little bit about the link between these landfills in Colorado, methane emissions, and human health. Because before I learned more about this, I was like, I don't really understand why this is related to my health, my friend's health, my patient's health. And I would like to share some of that information with you. I really want to emphasize that this truly is a public health issue. And just like systems exist that we wash our hands after we go to the toilet and things like that, it really comes down to it affecting everybody in the community, not just one person. And I'm really excited that community members like yourself are here today to learn about this. And hopefully, as a team and as communities throughout Colorado, we can advocate for some good changes. So first, let's speak in a little more detail about why methane is a problem and how it impacts us. So we know that landfills are the major source of methane, a climate superpollutant that has 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide over 20 years, as Ryan said. Methane is responsible for roughly a third of our global warming experienced to date, and that's a lot. That's a pretty big percentage. Um, Furthermore, methane is an important precursor to ozone, and ozone is a potent lung irritant. It's going to damage healthy lungs, people with lung disease, things like that. And this is particularly concerning to us Coloradans on the Front Range because we live in severe ozone non-attainment areas. And what I found even more striking is that methane is not just emitted by itself. It's co-emitted with many other harmful air pollutants such as benzenes, toluenes, ethylbenzene, vinyl chloride, which can also directly injure your lungs and cause downstream effects and put you at risk for things like lung cancer. So I started thinking to myself, when I learned more about this problem, I certainly don't want to be breathing all of these things that are not air or oxygen. And I'm wondering if you would be wanting to breathe this as well. I wanted to illustrate the diagram on the right of this slide here. It's Colorado's largest methane emitting landfills, and those are the red dots. And if you or a loved one lives close to one of these landfills, you are at higher risk of downstream health effects. But I think what's important is that air pollution from landfills doesn't just stop at the red dot, it travels for many miles. And so I would argue that this is an issue for basically anybody who lives in the state. On the next slide, um, I want to speak briefly about, because I could probably talk about this for days. So I'm only going to speak briefly about how methane emissions from landfills can contribute to a variety of human health issues. So the first one that I think most of us will think of is poor air quality due to the things I just spoke about, methane contributing to ozone, other air pollutants. So I think most of us will immediately think, oh, that's bad air quality, and that's bad for my lungs, which is absolutely true. So have you ever known someone that has struggled to breathe or had a wheeze? Maybe they have things like asthma or cystic fibrosis. They could have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. And really, they're at higher risk of worsening lung disease due to this poor air quality. And really, anybody with healthy lungs is at risk of developing new diseases as well. One component that is a little bit harder to realize that it has downstream effects is actually our extreme weather events. So we've experienced in the last many decades an increase in local wildfires, which directly make air quality worse from the ash and the different chemicals that are burnt there, or extreme heat events. And that can be linked and related to elevated methane and ozone in our environment. And it's challenging to see these downstream effects from like an extreme heat event because there's many different ways that it'll impact your health, from physically being in a hotter environment to affecting crops, causing food insecurities because they couldn't survive in our extreme heat. So as you can see that when there's increase in methane emissions, it's going to disrupt our food systems, and we may have the two extremes of precipitation, drought or extreme rainfall, and can cause downstream food insecurities to our different communities. Another thing that we've seen and that there's data to support is increases in infectious disease outbreaks. These can be a variety of different things, but most commonly are either like a bacterial or viral gastroenteritis or like a stomach bug that causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. These can be exacerbated when we see worsening air quality or extreme weather events and things like that. It's all connected. And then lastly, which I'll speak about in more detail in a moment, I just wanted to bring to your attention that mental health issues have been linked to methane emissions, worsening ozone levels that contribute to poor air quality and extreme heat as well. So on the next slide, I have a diagram that shows some more of these health impacts. So as you can see in this diagram, methane and other air pollutants, which actually I just realized is a little bit blurry, but we can share these slides so you can look at them in more detail. Really what this is showing is that it can impact your health in almost every part of your body. And so I think it's important to think about that and acknowledge that there is a relationship between this. So as Rosie mentioned, I live and care for patients in Larimer County, and this is home to one of the largest landfills in our state. And people living near these landfills, like myself, my patients, my family, experience higher exposures to air pollution that can lead to varying rates of respiratory issues, headaches, eye irritation, fatigue, and things like that. And in the pediatric emergency department where I work, I've taken care of countless of patients with asthma exacerbations or bronchiolitis, which often have viral triggers, but are worsened by poor air quality. And it's caused patients to be admitted with life-threatening airway disease. And to me, it's really frustrating to see this when we have a chance to improve our community's quality of life by decreasing that air pollution. Which is why I think that topics like this are important to talk about. So not only do these methane emissions contribute to these physical ailments, but it also impacts mental health. Did you know that there have been multiple studies done that illustrate a link between poor air quality, heat, and mental health? I found it really interesting that in 2019, so relatively recently, there was a study done that found that children went to the emergency department for anxiety and suicidal thoughts on days with higher levels of air pollution. And in 2018, another study found that higher ambient temperatures, so hotter days and heat waves, had increased risk of suicide. And it's not to say that this caused that, but I think there's a correlation, meaning that there's a relationship between it. All of these health impacts are profound, and it's so important to learn more about it and talk about these intersections. On the next slide, I just want to share two of patient examples that, of course, I've left out any information that would identify them, but I think it's important to think about because this might be someone you know or someone that you love may have experienced this, maybe you have experienced this, and just wanted to share a link as to why this might be happening in more frequency. So I just distinctly, the first patient story, I distinctly remember a day last summer that we had received these alerts on our phones that indicated an ozone action day, meaning that at-risk populations, including children, should limit their exposure to outdoors due to bad air quality, which is never fun to tell. As a pediatrician and as a mom, I want kids to be playing outside, but I also want to keep them safe and healthy at the same time. So I remember a little 7-year-old girl. She had tears in her eyes and she was rushed into the emergency room experiencing breathing problems. She was breathing way too fast and she couldn't speak, which is alarming to me. I listened to her lungs and I briefly spoke with her parents to find out more about her history and learn what was going on in the last day. And it gave me the answer. She was having a severe asthma exacerbation. But what I asked myself was that it was the middle of the summer, and normally asthma flares happen in the winter because viruses trigger those asthma flares. Well, I realized it was probably due to the poor air quality, the air pollution, and her playing outside because she was being a kid. And all of that exacerbated her asthma and caused her to have an exacerbation. Luckily, she was treated in time, but the fear that this little girl and her parents experienced because she was struggling to breathe will have lasting impacts. And too often in my emergency department, I treat children suffering from severe asthma attacks that often can be linked to high levels of ozone and other pollutants, such as methane in our air. Another summer, I remember having a teenage athlete present to my emergency department, and he was really confused. He wasn't feeling good. It was very vague symptoms, and I was able to talk to his mother to get a little bit more information about what was going on, what was he doing, and importantly, I learned that he was playing football when all of this started. And we got our first set of vitals. We got his core body temperature, and it was through the roof. And we realized that he was suffering from heat stroke. This is a life-threatening consequence of extreme heat exposure. And extreme heat is fueled by climate change, and it already is the deadliest weather-related hazard. And methane-driven warming will only make it worse. And I take care of a lot of children and teenage athletes that are exposed to extreme heat, resulting in serious heat-related illnesses when they're just trying to be kids and exercise and stay healthy. And I have an obligation as a community member, a mother, a physician to allow kids to play outside, to be themselves and help reduce their risk to both heat-related illnesses and other illnesses due to poor air quality. On my next slide, I want to speak very briefly about landfills, methane, and environmental justice. So our most vulnerable populations in Colorado are disproportionately impacted by our poor air quality. And over half of the municipal solid waste landfills in Colorado are located in areas where asthma rates are significantly higher than the state average. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. And across the United States, landfills disproportionately located in low-income communities and in communities of color. And here in Colorado, we have 30 landfills that are located within a mile of disproportionately impacted communities. And two of our mega landfills, the Denver Arapahoe Disposal Site and the Tower Landfill, are located in environmental justice communities. And I think that is really important facts to learn about this because it's really impacting our most vulnerable populations. I love living in Larimer County. I think it's a beautiful, diverse area of Colorado with so many things to offer. And I think people probably feel that way about different parts of Colorado, and this is our home. However, many vulnerable populations live in this area right next to one of our biggest landfills, including young children who have higher minute ventilation, who have more immature lungs than the adult population, the elderly, where they have more lung injuries throughout their life and are at risk for different lung cancers and things like that, pregnant women, people suffering from depression or asthma or other chronic lung disease. There are many vulnerable populations that are probably your neighbors. And we are at risk for these extreme weather events here, causing downstream impacts on the health of everyone in our community. And I hope that you can see a little bit more after today that reducing these landfill methane emissions is not just an environmental issue, but it's also a public health necessity that impacts not only our most vulnerable populations, but everyone, including you and someone you know and love. Lastly, on my last slide, I don't want to just give only sad news. I want to think about a positive future. We know that landfill methane is a problem, but it's a solvable one. And the EPA estimates that landfills are the third largest source of methane in the United States, and they emit the equivalent of 74 coal-fired power plants, or more than 68 million cars on the road for a year. And that's a lot, like we've been discussing. But we're really encouraged that the state of Colorado is taking action to address one of the most solvable contributors to the climate crisis. And we're working to make sure that the rule is as strong as possible to protect our communities and work with other community agencies to make sure things stay out of our landfill that don't need to be there and can decrease methane emissions over time. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Ryan to discuss more about what exactly a rulemaking is. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Habermill. Wow, that's a tough act to follow. This very useful perspective that you shared with us. So as you mentioned, the state is taking action through the rulemaking process, and I wanted to take just a little bit of time to describe what that means, because I think a lot of us are probably familiar with how bills go through state government or local government, but rulemaking is a different policy process. And what happens is it's when a state agency updates a set of regulations or rules through the direction of the legislature, or in this case, the governor's office. And so the State Department, in this case, the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, or CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division, or APCD, if I use that acronym again, did a deep dive on the subject of regulating landfills. And through their process, they did a lot of internal research. They also conducted a technical working group early on where they brought in landfill operators, scientists, etc., to talk through some of the ideas that they were thinking through and hear from the experts about feasibility and effectiveness of these different strategies. From then, they opened it up to public participation and hosted 3 different virtual meetings to discuss the research that they found, the ideas that they're thinking, some findings from the technical working group. They also hosted a separate environmental justice focused working group to collect all this information. Meanwhile, they're taking public comment during these meetings and also written public comment, which they incorporated in their work. So that process started in, I believe, August of last year, and the public participation officials timeline has ended now, but there's still time to make your voice heard, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the rulemaking process is really right now, and the way this works is that the state has an air quality control division, which is separate from the Air Quality Control Commission, which is separate than the Air Pollution Control Division. The AQCC is a group of experts who are selected by the governor to make decisions on rulemaking processes. And at this phase of the rulemaking, different entities are starting to file as official parties to the rulemaking, which means they are coming to the table to discuss what the state drafted up. They drafted a draft rule of regulations, which we'll go into detail on. But at this stage, they're reaching out to groups, or groups are reaching out to the state to have a seat at the table to talk through what's in the draft rule, make some changes before it's then voted on by the Air Quality Control Commission in August. I will add that for the first time, EcoCycle will be a party to the rulemaking alongside our friends EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund. This is a new policy process for us, and we're learning quite a bit on this front. Here's a visual timeline if that's helpful for you. As I mentioned, we're just getting started in the actual rulemaking process. This draft rule has been public for about a month now, maybe, yeah, about a month. So interested parties are pouring through this technical report and related documents and strategizing on, in our perspective, how to make the most of this opportunity. So what's in this rule? There's quite a bit. And it's a technical document, and I'm not a technical person, but we've read through it, and we have a lot of allies in this broad coalition that I'll discuss a little bit later that helped analyze different aspects. So I'll just run through what's in this, and I'm happy to discuss these different topics to my best ability in the Q&A time. But one piece I wanted to call out is that this rule will create a super emitter program, and that's similar to oil and gas super emitter programs, where if a large plume or emission event from landfills takes place and it's detected by aerial monitoring, whether it's satellites, drones, airplanes. If it's detected, the state will let the landfill know, and they will need to address it through different mechanisms. So that's a big piece, is finding those plumes and fixing them. One piece I'll add on that, which maybe should have put up front, is that currently there's federal standards that most states have adopted on regulating landfills, but they're, in our opinion, outdated, and many of the emissions are estimated. They're not actually measured, and there are new technologies to really accurately measure landfill emissions, and unsurprisingly, they're a lot higher than previously expected. Another piece of the rule that is really ambitious is that the state has proposed to entirely phase out open flares. So if you recall that diagram of a landfill, when there's extra gas that's captured, some landfills flare that off. They destroy it to minimize gas impacts. That's considered an open flare, where you can see the flame. The state's proposing to just use enclosed flares to have more effective gas destruction, but also better monitoring to see and measure what type of gas is coming out of landfills. One other new piece that the state is proposing is using biocovers on landfills. And a biocover is something like a compost or a mulch that is applied to landfills, and that active, alive material soaks up some of the gas that emits out of leaky landfills. This is a particularly effective strategy for closed landfills that may not have an active gas system. You can apply magic compost, love compost, to help mitigate these emissions. The state's also proposing a shorter timeline for installing gas capture and collection systems. Currently, as I mentioned, there's a federal standard, but in aligning with a few other states that have passed more progressive landfill regulations, they want to shorten the timeline for when landfills need to install these systems so that they capture more gas when a landfill is built. I'll mention that the whole West Coast plus Maryland have updated their landfill regulations, and the state of Colorado did a great job analyzing the different aspects that were included and incorporating them into what we're doing here in the state. I'm proud to say that the state of Colorado currently has proposed the most progressive rule in the nation on this front. One other piece is to slightly lower a threshold to require monitoring to see if a landfill needs to install a gas collection system. Current threshold's around 500,000, suggest lowering it to 450. Some other states, particularly on the West Coast, that have more precipitation, have lower thresholds than that. One other piece I wanted to discuss in a little bit more detail is concerning advanced monitoring. So as I mentioned, previous estimations were just estimations. They're not super accurate measurements. However, it's 2025, and we have the technology to capture what plumes look like. That's the term to measure these gas events. And that means using planes, drones, and satellites to detect the intensity and amount of methane and other pollutants that come out of landfills. There's a study done in Pennsylvania where they flew, in this case, a plane over several times, and were able to actually measure different leaks from landfills and reduce emissions by 37%, which is really significant. The coalition that EcoCycle is part of was advocating to require the use of advanced methane monitoring. The state did something innovative where they are proposing to allow pathways to these different advanced monitoring systems, which is still useful. You know, having better measurements means better management. And one other piece that we leaned on in messaging was that Colorado is a leader in requiring advanced monitoring for the oil and gas sector. So we thought it was logical to ask for the requirement of advanced monitoring for landfills. So we're hoping that there's just more technology being used on this front in the future, and therefore more emissions and harmful pollutants can be mitigated. Now, in the draft rule, specifically in a separate document where they laid out climate and equity considerations, the state laid out what they heard in different public participation meetings, including up to around 50 public oral comments, 50 written comments that were overwhelmingly in support of more progressive regulation on this front. And there's even a section, and I copied it word for word here, on how coalition of advocates of all sorts of expertise advocated. And they said, here is how we change the rule based on what we heard from the public. And I won't read through them. You'll get the slides, but things such as including biocovers, lowering the threshold for gas installation systems, requiring stricter surface emission monitoring for leaks, not allowing exemptions for flares specifically in disproportionately impacted communities. That's a win for environmental justice. And also just being more comprehensive in how emissions are measured on that front. So as Rosie mentioned, we'll send a big old email with a bunch of links, and I'll specifically call out this climate and equity considerations piece. It's only about 6 pages long, and if you are loving the subject, which I am, it's worth a read. I also wanted to pull these quotes straight from the rule on their expected climate and environmental benefits, and I'll just read them verbatim. One quote says, the rule is expected to reduce emissions of hazardous air pollutants from MSW, that's municipal solid waste landfills, by 30.4 tons per year, which it's hard for me to imagine, but if a car is around a ton or 2 tons, I just can't picture about 15 or 30 cars weight worth of hazardous air pollutants being reduced through these different mechanisms. The other quote I wanted to highlight is quote, the expected emissions savings from installing gas capture and collection systems at the 18 landfills that do not already have gas capture and collection systems is expected to lead to the capture and destruction of 12.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's, if you're wondering in numbers what the impact might be, there you have it. Now, with all policy, you're probably wondering about the cost and economic impact too. And again, this is not estimations from advocates. I pulled some language straight from the rule. I will not read all of this. I'm just looking at the time and want to keep some time for Q&A. But the short of it, the first quote says that while there are costs, and they expect that to be around 170 million if fully implemented as is, they expect the benefits, considering climate impact benefits, to be around just over $1 billion, and that is a 1-to-6 cost benefit ratio. And in their words, showing that the rule is highly cost effective. Now, what does that mean for individuals and households? They went into a little bit about, the costs on landfills and how that gets passed along. And what they found is that in states that have more progressive regulations, it does not significantly increase cost for consumers. The state estimates that to be about 22.9, about $23 per household, not per individual, but per household per year. And that's just under $2 per month per household. And when we go back to that 1.6 cost benefit ratio, that gets me really excited. That sounds to me like a cost-effective climate solution. I'll also add that the Colorado Energy Office was awarded a $129 million federal grant, climate pollution reduction grant. And I might misquote the exact number. I'm not sure if I have the exact number, but around $20 to $30 million of that is earmarked for advanced methane monitoring. I'll say right now, in case it comes up in the Q&A, how exactly will these funds influence if this rule is passed as is? I'm not quite sure. I don't quite understand how that might work, but needless to say, the state has money set aside to help advance these monitoring systems. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the fantastic coalition that I've been working alongside for the past few months now. I think we started meeting last summer, maybe around July or August, and it has been a fantastic group of passionate, hardworking people to work with. I could spend the whole hour just talking about how great these organizations are, but quickly want to just call out a couple. Industrious Labs has been a technical expert on all things, same with RMI, EDF, of course. Green Latinos and Mi Familia Vota have brought in an environmental justice lens that is necessary, in my opinion, for any environmental regulation. There are also air quality and public health experts, Moms Clean Air Force, Healthy Air and Water Colorado Force, of course. Again, I could keep talking about how great the folks are on this coalition, and we all have the same shared mission of reducing greenhouse gas and public health impacts in Colorado. One activity that our coalition did was we reached out to local elected officials across the state and said, here's what the state is considering. Roughly speaking, we sent this out before the actual rule was presented, and created a sign-on letter, and over 40 local elected officials signed on to this letter, which we're very proud of. There's support from all over the state. Also mentioned that there's been different pieces of media. If you just search Colorado landfill methane, you'll read different news pieces all the way back through last year. And I just wanted to highlight two. There are a lot of great in-depth analyses and coverage of this issue. But one piece came out recently from Healthy Air in Colorado's own Robin Richard, who's down in Southwest Colorado. Again, speaking to the public health impacts and how this is an opportunity for Colorado to be a national leader on this front. And there's also an op-ed from former Governor Bill Ritter, echoing the same sentiments, that this is an opportunity for us to lead. Again, we'll include links as we send these out. Now, of course, it wouldn't be an EcoCycle webinar along with our friends at HAWC without a call to action. And we have a couple pieces that we want to speak on. One is that our coalition has been discussing doing door-to-door canvassing to speak to people who live near landfills and share information and how they can reach out to the state about this issue. As we found through advocacy, a lot of folks don't know that the state is taking action on this issue. They're not aware of the public health and environmental impacts of landfills. And we would just like to educate folks and also hear from them. What are their perspectives? And that will be in Erie and Commerce City. And we have a QR code there that'll bring you to a page just to collect your information for when we do launch this canvassing effort. And what we'll ask folks to do, and what I'm asking you all on this call to do, is write a letter to the state's climate change email address with the subject line landfill methane reduction. And you can just share your thoughts and experiences and what you've learned and what's important to you. The state wants to hear from constituents about really all aspects. And it's hard sometimes. It's hard to reach out to folks. And that's what we're hoping to do is to make you all aware that this is an action that you can take from your desktop computer or from your phone, right? Just sending a quick message to the state, it really does add up as reflected in the reports that they shared. Some additional resources. EcoCycle has what we call a campaign hub, where we try to list the most up-to-date resources, including bilingual fact sheets. We did a webinar back in October with many of the coalition folks that I mentioned earlier on this presentation. And it also, we had the first White House climate advisor, Gina McCarthy, do an opening statement on that front. So if you want to learn more about this, that webinar is hosted on just ecocycle.org/landfill-methane. Of course, HAWC mentioned the mountainous methane report, and that is a great deep dive, a lot of graphics on satellite imaging of these plumes, and really in-depth analysis that's specific to Colorado. We also want to share a link to CDPHE's landfill methane webpage, where they lay out what's going on in the rulemaking and recordings of the public participation meetings. If you want to hear a more technical take straight from the state, they're all recorded and listed on the state's website. And also the don'twasteourfuture.org webpage that's hosted by our friends Industrious Labs, and they analyze all 50 states and have a lot of interactive data on their website, and we wanted to include that too. My email is just Ryan, R-Y-A-N, @ecocycle.org. I talk trash all day, every day. Love doing it. And you'll see our webpage is listed there as well. And I just want to thank you all for listening to what we have to say here. We have some time for Q&A. Again, if I don't know an answer, I likely know the person to ask. So please ask your questions, and we'll hang around until about 7:15, unless we run out of things to discuss. Thanks, everyone.
Wow, thank you so much, you guys. Like Ryan, I talk trash all day, and there was so much that I learned from what you shared tonight. So thank you so much for being here with us. We are a little light in the Q&A box, honestly. I know you've done a really good job of explaining, but you guys don't be shy with your questions. I said this at the very beginning, but if you didn't know, you have a Q&A box at the bottom. Oh, there you go. Somebody just used it. Thank you, Julie. So yeah, I'll hop into the ones that we have, but please don't be shy in putting your questions in the Q&A box. Okay. Will there be some kind of email blast or action alert when the AQCC opens up registration for public testimony? If so, how should we sign up to receive that alert and talking points? So I think, Ryan, you covered this in your little action alert slide, and we will, as always, we'll send out that information. But do you have anything else to add about that?
Yeah, normally when EcoCycle sends out an action alert to write to, whether it's an elected official, the governor's office, whoever it might be, we normally include a draft letter that's editable to give some different talking points, messaging. Of course, it's most impactful to hear directly from your perspective. Earlier on, we reached out to our Eco Leader network to say, all right, who lives near a landfill? Because the state asked us to help them connect with people. So we'll do an action alert that will just go to the state's general climate change email address. But as I mentioned, the rulemaking process is happening now, but it's until that vote is cast, it's never too late to share your perspective on this issue.
Okay. And HAWC experts, please don't be shy in jumping in if you have anything to add, of course. Great. And I think that actually covered 2 in 1, because Julie was asking, will you give your top 3 asks for our letters? So yes, we will. We always send a little outline, but of course, anytime representatives receive letters, it's good to have some, diversity in what you're saying and personalization. But yes, it's intimidating to just start it from scratch.
I would just,
okay.
For Rosie, I just add to that, some of HAWC's asks and Dr. Habermill testified to the AQCC back in February. And some of our asks were around remote advanced monitoring and fence line monitoring. They don't always do the best job of actually when they're walking in their grid systems to monitor. But data transparency. So, and Dr. Habermill, please, if you have anything to add to this, but getting the actual information and making it public and in an accessible format really helps professionals, researchers, and physicians and others who are studying this understand the extent of the emissions and what those health impacts, what that might mean for health impacts. So data transparency in a lot of these rulemakings, but in this one in particular, is very important.
Great. Thanks, Alex. It looks like there's two that are in the same vein, so maybe I'll read them together. Do you expect the low emphasis on climate change at the federal level will negatively affect this program? And are the current federal cuts affecting the methane measuring plans that you described?
Yeah, so there was a period where the state was not sure that the climate pollution reduction grant funds that they were awarded would land. I can't speak to whether they have landed yet, but my understanding is that they will be distributed to the state. Just a quick word, and of course, EcoCycle's a nonpartisan nonprofit, but the federal government, understandably, it's a slow-moving beast. It's encapsulating an enormous, diverse country, which is why I think state regulation policy is so important. As I mentioned, some other states have updated their landfill regulations specifically. I think Colorado is doing it best right now, and I really hope that some other state does it even better than what we're doing. I hope they learn more. I hope that we get better data through advanced monitoring, and then that can be used in other states to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions and toxic air pollutants.
I think that one of the things that I do in my work and related to this, especially with all the changes happening at the federal level, is like Ryan said, if we focus on what we're dealing with here locally and make good change, it'll go a long way. And so I know that can be stressful when there's a lot of unknowns, but we can make changes here, and I'm really happy to see the changes that Colorado's making to address that.
And if I can add just one last comment on that, meeting and speaking with the CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division folks, they are really smart. They know this issue inside and out, and they're hardworking, and they would reach out to the Environmental Coalition and say, well, we're thinking about this. What do you think about this? And just props to the team at APCD. Again, we're working with a rule right now that again has not been passed, but it's ambitious, it's cutting edge, and I just wanted to give them props for their work in the past few months.
Yeah. Speaking as the engagement person for EcoCycle, I've seen such a huge wave of people who are trying to get involved, and there are many levels that we can get involved, and that's exciting. Okay, we have two questions both about monitoring. So I think, Ryan, you did talk a bit about how it actually works, and we will send those slides out, but there's a lot of information. So, okay, the first one is, how are methane emissions being monitored? Are you aware of the Carbon Mapper satellite system? And then the other one is, how will super emitters be identified? Self-reporting or independent, e.g. state monitoring? If the latter, will the state have enough resources to do this effectively, i.e. does the legislation include funding? Ryan's working on it.
I had to pull up the Q&A box to read that to make sure I can touch on the pieces that I'm able to touch on. So first, how are emissions or in this case leaks currently monitored? And it's through surface emission monitoring, SEM. And essentially that's someone walking around a small piece of a landfill with it almost looks like a metal detector, but it's called a sniffer, and it's a device that detects when there is a leak. It's inefficient. It does not capture the entirety of a landfill. Again, we have better technology such as Carbon Mapper that this individual mentioned. This is, you can go to carbonmapper.org or it might be .com. This is a satellite program that's collecting emissions data, and that has been a big piece of this puzzle to see, oh, emissions are higher than we expected. Let's see, where did I already lost that question, but does the legislation include funding? So that's one piece, and the answer is no. This isn't a traditional bill where there's a fiscal note attached to it. The onus to pay for updating would be on landfills, which are both privately operated, and in Colorado there are a lot of county-owned and operated landfills as well. How the state's climate pollution reduction grant may play into covering the costs of these different systems, specifically monitoring, I'm not entirely sure. That's something I'll ask the coalition tomorrow and write out a thorough response. So we won't send this out tomorrow, likely. It'll probably be sometime next week to get all things together, and especially that piece, which I wasn't able to answer.
Yeah. Eric and Judy and Ken are some of our most knowledgeable supporters. So yeah, we'll follow up with you guys. Thank you for asking that question. Sorry, I'm trying to catch up here. Okay, I know you can talk about this one. I mean, all of these, but do you know of any large scale efforts to increase diversion from landfills on a policy level, particularly relating to compostables?
So a couple things. There are large scale policy efforts, specifically in other states. I'm thinking state of Washington, California, and other communities across the nation, really. Some states have policies called a landfill ban, which is really not a great term to essentially try to keep food waste in particular out of landfills. So in New England in particular, where landfill space is limited, those policies are active. Here in Colorado, there are different communities on the local scale have different efforts, whether it's through policy, through just having great infrastructure or systems that are able to divert organic material. But as far as state policy to help divert organics, one bill that EcoCycle advocated for alongside our friends at Recycle Colorado and beyond was to combine two grant funds that has now become the Colorado Circular Communities Enterprise Grant Fund, or C3 for short. And that is a pot of money that it grows because it's a fee on landfills. That pot of money is used for all sorts of diversion projects across the state, including helping small composters, small and large composters, I should say, get infrastructure, build different. I guess I can't speak beyond building infrastructure. That's really what the pot of money is for, but that really does make a difference. I'll mention, I live just outside of Fort Collins, and I know our friends Compost Queen has received some state grant funds, and they're doing a fantastic job keeping food scraps out of the landfill and creating a high quality compost that I could go on and on about the benefits of putting that compost on soils. But one last piece on this, and you can tell I'm getting excited about it. I'll reel back a little bit, but another bill that EcoCycle and our friends worked on was to direct the state to conduct an organics diversion study. So statewide, not just Front Range or community focus. It looks at the whole state and assessed different options for helping keep organics out of the landfill, whether it's what infrastructure is needed, what policy is out there, and what's feasible on the local level, state level. It's like 200 pages long, but it's on the state website too. And I contributed a little bit to that report. So I think that organics diversion is really the next big thing in Colorado. The environmental benefits are tremendous, and let's all get the word out on that front.
And I think my hope is that if we can actually have data transparency and show that there's X amount of methane being produced at these landfills in Colorado, then the state can take it to that next policy level and come up with a solution which we know is related to composting and not just be, because in Fort Collins I compost too, but it's not a citywide thing. It's whatever organization you go with, which is great, and I'm happy they're doing it, but it would be even more amazing if every city just did that, just like they come and pick up our trash. You know what I mean? And if that's a policy, then it's going to be in place for everyone to use it, not just certain certain people in certain areas.
Yeah. Okay, on that note, we have some follow-up questions about food waste. So so all of the tactics that we just talked about, all of the how important it is to divert all of those organics from the landfill, is there any current incentive in Colorado for food diversion from restaurants?
You know, I it's either Lafayette or Louisville. I get my Boulder County L towns mixed up sometimes, but they use some of the funds collected from their disposable bag fee that goes into a pot of funds, and they use that to help businesses sign up for compost collection services. So that's just one community. I think there are others too. I think Vail comes to mind. City of Fort Collins did that through, I think it's called the WRAP program. I'm not sure if that's going on right now. So there are some financial incentives, and I'll mention that policy is another incentive. The city of Boulder has the Universal Zero Waste Ordinance to require composting at restaurants, and city and county of Denver's just getting final touches on the Waste No More ballot initiative that will also require composting, at least at some restaurants. So those are some incentives. We'd like to see those incentives and really the systems in a larger scale grow, right? Because if there's the economy of scale, if there's education about the benefits of this, then it becomes easy and those barriers to composting break down. So that's what we're trying to do every day at EcoCycle.
Yep. Okay, this I think it's just going to be a general statistic that we have, but how much of the material that goes to landfill total comes from food waste? Do you guys know?
I think I had a slide earlier on that. EPA has some numbers, and they're also state and local numbers. What I see generally is around 25% of what goes into a landfill is food waste, and then I think it's about a third total is just organic material, so including yard trimmings, etc. Those numbers are a little fuzzy, but around that percentage. I'd love that percentage to be zero, and it's doable, right?
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, which leads. So we have about 7 minutes left. We'll try to get these last few. But so on that note, this person is wondering how much emissions, ballpark percentage, can be reduced if all organic waste is prevented from going to landfills in the first place. So in some households, organic waste is small, and even that needs to go to compost. So will that make a significant impact?
I would say to the last point of that question, does it make a significant impact? Yes. And people often ask me, are environmental issues, are they on the individual or are they on the system to fix? And my answer to them might not be satisfying, but I think it's on both, right? It's individuals who make changes at the systemic level, and sometimes that systemic level through policy or whatever it might be, influence individuals. So it's a back and forth relationship. So diverting food scraps, yard trimmings, and recycling on an individual level does make an impact, even if you look at broader environmental impact issues and think that this is minor. It really does, and it does even more when you think about your circles of influence, right? Your place of business, your friends, your larger community. We've seen it over and over again where people step up and become the leaders and ripple that change throughout their community. If you want to learn more about what EcoCycle has going on that front, we have a program called the Eco Leaders, formerly the Block Leader program, that's all about empowering individuals to make that change across the board. So I might have not hit on all of that question, but that's just my philosophy on environmental change, and I believe it deeply.
Yeah. Yeah. And statistically, we've seen that kind of peer-to-peer outreach is very effective. It's not just your feeling. And so I think just as a follow-up to that answer, Ryan, which was that, yeah, this is a very big deal. Oh, you're typing an answer to Mona. So yeah, I don't know if we can tease out the impacts from food waste versus yard waste, but organics are the whole problem. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so we'll finish with a health impact question for you, HAWC friends. Is the main direct health impact of methane due to its contribution to ozone? Is this a bigger health effect than benzene? I apologize, I don't know how to say that word. Other emissions and other chemicals?
That's a great question. So methane is a key component of natural gas, and methane by itself is a very potent greenhouse gas, and it can trap more heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, which I think is often spoken about. And so I would argue that it is more important and has more direct health impacts than some of the other air toxins. Now, those other air toxins, they're not great either. But I think the amount of methane produced from various things, natural occurring sources, landfills, animal livestock, etc., that all is compounding, and it's also just a precursor to ozone. So, I don't know if Alex has more to say about that, but I would argue that methane does have more downstream effects for your health than some of these other air toxins, just because of the simple quantity and the potent greenhouse gas that it is.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add there, Nikita. Thank you, but or really much of anything, but just that methane is that primary contributor, as you said, to the ground level ozone, and is a significant air toxic. So ranking it, I don't know, but yeah, it's substantial from a hazard standpoint.
Yeah. This is a really complex issue. There were so many different facets and so many different perspectives to look at. But I think personally, like my kind of takeaway from what I learned from you guys today was like, this is a huge issue and it's so easy to figure out kind of what the solutions are. And not that it's easy to do those solutions, but it's like in some of our conversations environmentally, we're like, whoops, like there's not much you can do about that. And in this case, it's like, oh, it's clear what we should do. And it's cool to have kind of organizations and advocates from all of these different backgrounds and perspectives coming together on one issue. So with that, I think we've answered our questions. I so appreciate everyone who showed up tonight. Thank you to our panelists once again. It was such a treat to learn from you. For the maybe 10th time, we will send out a big email with all of this, so don't fret. You don't have to email us. If you want to email us right away asking for the recording, I won't be mad, but just know that the recording, the slides, all of the things that we've been talking about tonight are coming your way, maybe early next week, so we can make sure we answer all of your questions really thoroughly. But again, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for caring, and we hope to see you, at one of these calls to action or the next webinar. Ryan, panelists, anything to close out?
No, thanks to EcoCycle for inviting HAWC to co-host with you on this, and Dr. Harumel, it's always a pleasure, and I'm so glad you could join us tonight. And thank you to all the attendees for coming in and spending Thursday evening with us on this important topic. It was really great, and hope you'll get involved in these issues and other air toxic issues through EcoCycle, through HAWC, through other organizations.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, we will see you all soon. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday evening and a wonderful weekend. And please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
panelists.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thank
Good night.
you.